The wild dog metaphor is a very good one because they're probably the best hunters in Africa. They punch way above their weight division. They are very skillful if they hunt according to the plan and they don't start biting each other. But, they are very, very skillful. But I also learned in Nelson Mandela Bay that there's some political organizations and individuals that actually prefer chaos. Wild dogs cause chaos, and then they exploit the chaos.
How do we make coalitions work in South Africa? Well, somebody who has a lot of experience in local government as well as politics in South Africa more broadly is Athol Trollip. He is the interim chairperson of Action South Africa in the Eastern Cape. Athol Trollip, welcome to the Solutions Podcast.
Good evening, David. It's a pleasure being in an interview with people who are looking for solutions. I think South Africa is desperately crying out for solutions. South Africans have had enough of finger pointing and blame shifting and scapegoating and all of those kind of things. We need solutions, and I'd be very happy to talk to you about how we could find them.
All right, great. Well, let's get into it. So before we do that, maybe just a bit of background to you and your journey to politics.
Oh, David, it's such a long story, but I'll truncate it. I'm actually a farmer boy. I was born in the Eastern Cape on a farm. I was the sixth generation on the same farm. My father farmed on the farm, my grandfather and his forebears. And I obviously grew up in an opposition-orientated home during the time of apartheid. My family stood in opposition to apartheid. My grandfather wanted to study to become a lawyer, but two of his brothers were killed in the First World War. And he had no option. He had to come back and farm on the family farm. And some years later, when he had done really well in farming, he stood for election of the United Party for a constituency in Port Elizabeth Central, and he got elected as a member of parliament. And, I have the same name as my grandfather. I grew up in that political family. I am very politically aware. And I actually got into politics, not necessarily because of the background, but I came back to farm on the family farm and I immersed myself in community service. That's what I really like doing. Love my community, love my province, and obviously my country. And that immersion in community service led me to get involved in organized agriculture. And then I served on the Eastern Cape Agricultural Union executive. And in 1995, when the local government elections came around, I was asked to represent the farming community in an election in the Athol district municipality. And I was co-opted onto the executive of that district municipality by newly elected ANC returning exilees and liberation fighters. And I found that period really amazing because they were new to government, never had any experience in government. They identified that maybe I could help them, and I was co-opted onto an executive. And I think if we had that kind of mentality now in South Africa, we could do much better. Unfortunately, I did experience after those first 4 years in that district municipality that when I went to the legislature and later to parliament, that politics became more confrontational. And I believe that it became more and more confrontational rather than cooperative as the ANC became exposed for their ineptitude in government and kleptocratic mentality. So they became very, very defensive. And whenever one's defensive, you put up fences around you and you're not open to any kind of cooperation and collaboration. So I think that's sorely missing in South Africa. But I did have a foretaste of it. And I know we're going to talk about coalitions and how they can work better, but I also had a taste of coalitions. And I can just say one thing about coalitions. They're not easy. And they're a very new concept to us in South Africa, but you only gain experience by doing things. And I think the one good thing in South Africa at the moment is that there are a number of coalitions. People are trying them out. They're learning how to do them better. And I think people are learning and people realize that we need to find an alternative form of government to what we currently have. We saw what one-party domination did for 48 years in this country. And now we've had one-party domination for 28 years. And I sincerely hope that the South Africans' propensity to endure won't mean that we'll have to endure another 20 years under the ANC government before we come waken up to the fact that there is an alternative.
Yeah, and I think the single party dominance that has prevailed in South Africa for so many decades is starting to crack and to crumble. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that the ANC will lose power. But if you look at the rolling blackouts that have characterized the last couple of weeks, some of the polling numbers that are coming out, that seems to suggest an ebbing of the ANC's hegemony. All right, well, maybe as a way of prefacing this conversation about coalitions, we could just focus on your time as mayor of Nelson Mandela Bay, also known as Port Elizabeth. And how did you come to power? What was your approach when in power, and how did you deal with some of the systemic rot that had preceded your administration?
Obviously, we did a lot of planning and preparation. I was in the Democratic Alliance then, and I remember going to a training workshop where there were myself, Herman Mashaba, Solly Msimanga, and Patricia DeLille. There were only 4 workshop attendees, and there were 6 people making presentations. It's very seldom that you go to such an intensive preparation. My party had also sent me to Germany to go and study how they run coalitions there and to get some experience. And then obviously there was an 18-month-long campaign. And I learned a lot in that campaign, because there is no substitute to convincing people to change their mind about politics and their affiliation to politics other than going to their doors. So I had an 18-month-long campaign, the longest in the party's history. I started my campaign off. We had 60 wards in Nelson Mandela Bay. I went to 60 wards in 60 days, physically, knocked on doors in each ward. And then at the end of the campaign, 18 months later, I went to 60 wards in 30 days. And obviously in between that period, I visited those communities repetitively so that I knew, like the back of my hand, I knew that city. I knew where the logistical problems were, where the infrastructural problems were, and I got to know people, and people got to know me. So there was a 17 percentage point swing in that election, which was, I think the biggest ever in post-liberation South Africa. The DA went from 40% to 47%, and the ANC from 51% to 41%. So, the ANC arrogance was that we would never win, and unfortunately we didn't win outright. We were just short, about 15,000 votes short, but we were able to put a coalition together of 4 political parties. The DA had 57 seats, the UDM had 2, ACDP had 1, and COPE had 1. So we had a 61-seat majority, which was a very, very narrow majority of 1 seat, but nevertheless we had a majority coalition. Whereas my other colleagues in Johannesburg and Tshwane had minority coalitions, which are even more difficult to run, and they had a cooperative agreement with the EFF, which I fortunately didn't have to deal with. And David, unfortunately, our coalition didn't last. There are a number of reasons for that, but my primary promise to the electorate was that I would stop corruption. And within 2.5 months of government, I came to learn that my deputy mayor from the UDM was involved in corruption. I raised this in 5 formal meetings with the UDM and the DA, and the UDM just refused to do anything about it. I wrote Bantu Holomisa 21 letters, and I gave him chapter and verse about what was going on, and he simply refused to deal with it. And ultimately, I had to take a decision because neither of my parties wanted to do anything about it. So I fired Mongameli Bobani as the mayoral committee member, knowing that that would probably precipitate him aligning with the EFF and the ANC to get me out. And that's ultimately what happened. But I want to remind you and the public that it couldn't have happened without the collaboration of one of our own councillors. One of our own councillors was induced not to vote, and he abstained, and therefore the opposition that didn't have the numbers suddenly got the numbers because they co-opted one of our own. And that's become a real concern in South African politics, especially with this proliferation of, small parties. And I understand why it's happening, because as you move away from hegemony, you have racial nationalist organizations, minority organizations, political parties headed up by individuals. You have a plethora of them out there, but they're very vulnerable to being swayed through patronage or some kind of inducement. So I lost, I lost the mayorship, and the rest is history. But I did learn that during that period of time. I mean, imagine we went from being the second worst run metro in the country to the second best in 1 year. The turnaround was astounding. And that was done in a coalition agreement, even one that was very fraught with me battling with my deputy mayor and battling with somebody who was actually voting against us in that coalition. Almost 3 months after the coalition, he'd broken every provision of the coalition and was voting against us. So my experience tells me that coalitions can work, even if you have difficulties. But the one thing you have to have in a coalition, David, you've got to have a coalition agreement that is actually signed in blood by all the partners, so that if there is any kind of infraction by anyone in that agreement, whether it's the mayor, deputy mayor, speaker, or the lowliest councillor in that coalition agreement, if there's any kind of infraction or non-adherence to the rules that you've signed for, there must be consequences and they must be removed. As soon as parties start protecting their individuals and don't want to rock the boat or the status quo, that's when coalitions become really, really weak. So you need strong leadership, you need a proper coalition agreement, and there needs to be, as I can't put it stronger than saying the code needs to be signed in blood. And if you can do that, then you can learn to cooperate and collaborate in the honorable sense to get the job done. And I know, like South Africans are better together. It's appalling that the current national government, which is also a nationalist organization, a racial nationalist organization, is doing exactly the same thing that the previous racial national government did under apartheid. The ANC government is actually hell-bent on keeping South Africans polarized. In fact, I believe our society is even more polarized now than it was even during apartheid, because there's this race-mongering and scaremongering all the time. And I've seen it in Nelson Mandela Bay, where my administration was predominantly ANC, predominantly black. They collaborated and cooperated with us as soon as we treated them professionally, and they could express themselves professionally. They started delivering. And I believe that same thing can happen across the country.
All right. Well, one of the points that you raised there is around this proliferation of small parties. And we saw a couple of weeks ago in the Johannesburg City Council that a number of councillors went rogue, disobeying the orders from their head office. COPE is currently in a state of disarray. One of their councillors voted to support the motion of no confidence against the Speaker, Vasco da Gama, that was then subsequently supported by the ANC and the EFF. I think the ACDP had a similar problem. Those councillors were kind of later dealt with, I think, in the case of the ACDP. I mean, it just shows, how fragile and tenuous these things are. So you talk about enforcing that coalition, signing it with blood, but how do you actually enforce that? How do you hold all of these disparate parties to account?
I think the first thing, David, the only way to break hegemony is for people to vote for other political parties. So what we've seen in South Africa, first of all, is that we've got 20 million registered voters in South Africa that did not vote in the last election. So I'm not too worried about that component, because even though it's the majority of voters, 53%, those people are in transition, or in the political wilderness. They might have been staunch ANC or staunch DA or staunch EFF or staunch whatever political party, but they become disillusioned and they're disengaged and they're politically moribund at the moment. Okay, so those people can be mobilized, I believe, if you can make them believe that there's an alternative and there's something new and that there can be a solution to the problems. I think those people can be quickly engaged and turned around into active voters. The 10 million South Africans that are voting age that aren't registered, they're a huge concern because they're unlikely ever to register. If you haven't registered in the last 2 or 3 elections, there's no reason why you will ever again. So then, we've got these small political parties that are cropping up. We've got more political parties than any other country in the world. And I think that, and coupled with the fact that the quality of public representatives in South Africa is really, really poor. If you look at most caucuses, whether it's in a municipality or in the provincial legislature or the National Assembly, most of those people in those caucuses are not the kind of people that would be scoring top on job interviews in the private sector or even in the public sector. So I think there is a dearth of quality, reliable, ethical, honest political representatives in South Africa. And So that's why you have all these political parties mushrooming up. People see it as a job rather than as a vocation. And they believe if they can muster enough votes, 5,000 or 10,000 votes, they can get a seat on council and they can get a nice salary. And if they're smart enough, they can align themselves with a party that's desperate to go into government, and they can wangle themselves a political seat. And my experience is that in coalitions, the smallest parties negotiate the greatest concessions because they are the kingmakers. And many times they want to be the king. Now, I've often got into a bit of trouble myself with coalition partners where I've said, I have never seen a successful dog that is wagged by the tail. So I believe the biggest party in a coalition should take the leadership role. Otherwise, why would you have a coalition? Why would you go into government and be part of government and you're implementing a one-party, one-man party's policies? It would be ludicrous. So I think there's a lot of growing up to be done in South Africa with regards to that. But if I can go back to Nelson Mandela, there's been a revolving door of mayors for the last 6 or 7 years. That's just been really alarming. Every year there's a different mayor. But after the last election, there was a number of small little parties that went into a coalition with the ANC. And they soon realized that their voters were really annoyed with them because the voters had voted for them because they'd promised to go against the ANC and to get rid of the ANC. And the first thing they did to get a position on a mayoral committee or, a deputy mayor position aligned with the ANC. And that didn't last long. It didn't even last a year. So that coalition has gone by the wayside, and they're now trying to put a new one together. So transactional politics for personal gain has been the Achilles heel of South African coalitions to date. It's all about power, and it's all about patronage and inducing people into a coalition rather than people coming into a coalition for honorable intentions of giving better governance or service delivery.
All right. So, let's look more carefully at this run up to 2024. And I think that, as we mentioned, the ANC is in a state of disarray at the moment. And I was very pleased to see you quoting Antonio Gramsci, which I've done many times on this show, in your recent speech at the BizNews conference. And Gramsci was a Marxist political theorist, and he said, the crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. In this interregnum, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear. There's no shortage of morbid symptoms. So, what are the chances of getting the ANC under that 50% threshold? Because the polls are a bit inconclusive. And what role would ASA play potentially in stealing voter support away from the dominant party?
I suppose there are any number of metaphors that one could use. But while you were asking me then, I was thinking to myself that the ANC is like, a world heavyweight boxing champion or a boxing champion that retires and then comes back and then retires again and runs out of money and comes back again. Inevitably, what happens is that, if you've been the world boxing champion, whatever weight division, for a number of years, you're a very good boxer, but then time catches up with you and you get out of shape, and you have the young dogs that are waiting to be born. When they smell blood, they come after you and they take you out ultimately. So, you end up being a loser all round. So I think the ANC are starting to be reminiscent of, a world boxing champion that keeps thinking they can come back on the strength of their past achievements. And I think the ANC's internal travails that they are faced with is hastening their demise. And I really hope that they elect somebody like Zweli Mkhize or Ace Magashule or Didi, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. I couldn't care who they elect at their conference, but I hope they elect somebody really controversial, which will hasten their demise even more, because I believe that the political parties, the major players, are starting to smell blood, and so are the voters. For the first time, I have seen voters that are expressing themselves quite openly and publicly. This afternoon and yesterday, I had a classic example. I was in a town called Queenstown. It's now called Enoch and Gachima. And we had public meetings in the middle of a taxi rank where the taxi owners and taxi drivers were signing up membership in public, right in the middle of the day. Now, I've never, ever experienced that before because, the taxi industry is a fraught industry. They're always negotiating with government about routes and about um, subsidies and all sorts of things, and they're always aligning themselves, but always fighting with government. And for them to embrace and have an open discourse in a taxi rank and invite us to come back again today was something that I've never seen before. So I can only think that voters are starting to realize that they don't have to endure whatever hardships that they have to endure now. And South Africans, as I said earlier, have got a propensity to take pain and endure hardship like few other nations in the world, especially poor Black South Africans. They just suffer in silence. And I'm encouraging them wherever I go, is to say to voters, you don't have to suffer in silence. There's nothing wrong with wanting more for your kids, or kids wanting more than what their parents have. So I really think, David, there's a combination of the ANC starting to lose everything, and for the electorate to start to realize that they can actually have a different government, and they don't have to endure this mess that we're in. And I think the fact that the electricity doesn't work and that many towns have run out of water, the sewage infrastructure in most Platteland towns just doesn't work, and that sewage just runs down the streams and into the rivers, and that most of the roads are untrafficable. Those are kind of things that start making people really, really angry. Even ANC supporters, middle-class officials of government, local, provincial, and national government, those are blue-collared people that are aspiring. They want a better life. They want lights, and they want street lights, and they want a police service that will answer the phone when they need them in an emergency. They want to go to hospital and get better and not die. Those are the kind of things that normal South Africans are wanting that they're not getting, and they believe that if they want it, they can have to vote for it. And I think that will really be the real legacy of Nelson Mandela to this country, because Mandela had the foresight to tell ANC supporters that if the ANC does to them what the apartheid government did to them, they must do to the ANC what they did to the apartheid government. Now, that was the first president of this country who already had a foresight to say that the ANC could actually, even with the best intentions, they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And we've seen the ANC lose the plot with all the very best intentions. And Mandela had the foresight. So his legacy could be to South Africans that if you have a proper democracy, if your government, whichever it is, lets you down, you can replace it with another government.
Yeah, and I think that's what democracy is all about, the peaceful transfer of power. And if the ANC is an aging heavyweight boxer, then I think the electorate is a battered spouse who hopefully has finally had enough and has the courage to part ways. But when we talk about the ANC, various ideological problems there, a highly kind of centralized mentality, very socialist in its outlook. That's very similar to the Economic Freedom Fighters, the splinter group that used to be the ANC Youth League, and perhaps just a more radical version of the ANC. And there have been some noises from the leader of the EFF, Julius Malema, to suggest that they might be open to some kind of coalition. If the ANC drops below 50%, say gets 47, 48%, goes in to a coalition with the EFF, that could trigger some pretty dramatic downside scenarios in South Africa. So what is ASA's view of the EFF? You see that as a threat, and would you rule out working with the EFF in any future coalition?
Okay, well, let me just correct you with one thing. Our party's name is ActionSA, not ASA. You'll remember that Herman Mashaba went to court against the IEC, who put the party's name in as ASA, and he said we're not some failed airline like SAA. We are ActionSA. So, yeah, David, let me just say that, I think ultimately Julius Malema, there's no secret that his objective is to have a reverse takeover of the ANC. He comes out of the ANC. He actually is ANC. Remember, he said he would kill for Zuma, and then later said he'd kill Zuma, and then later he was having tea with Zuma. Julius Malema is ANC. That's in his DNA. And he could easily have a reverse takeover of the ANC. If the ANC gets brought just below 50% and they go into a coalition with the EFF, Malema could become president of South Africa. So I think that is a very scary scenario. So the real challenge for all other self-respecting political organizations is to stop pointing fingers at each other, stop being puerile, and focus on the big picture, which is to get the ANC closer to 40%. And it can be done. The ANC is very, very vulnerable, and we need to get the ANC closer to 40 or even under 40% so that we can put together an alternative opposition government. But, you know, to go back to the EFF and the ANC, Julius Malema has actually shown that he has no ideological blueprint, because he flip-flops on absolutely everything. But the one thing that has defined his political cowardice is that he has refused to date to go into a coalition agreement. So they have these cooperation agreements where they negotiate transactional agreements that suit them, but they don't ever have to implement them, whatever they negotiate. They don't have to find the budget. They don't have to make it work. So essentially, they probably are the most venal political party in South Africa, because nobody knows what they stand for. So I don't believe that South Africa will have an ANC-EFF majority, because people are talking about that in the street and people are worried about that. So we are hell-bent on bringing the ANC below 50% and close to 40%. And I think the EFF have started to pick up some of their own headwinds, because Julius Malema is a megalomaniac dictator. And the one thing I've learned in a political party, and I've been in a political party for a long time, and I'm now in a new political party, is that politicians don't like to be told by anyone what to do. Politicians like to tell. They don't like to be told. And Julius Malema is picking up problems within his own party, and there is some resistance to his kind of commander-in-chief stature that he demands. So to answer your question was about how do we avert that? I think what we need to do is we need to start showing South Africans between now and 2024, where we are in coalition, with ActionSA, with the DA and whoever, that we are prepared to focus on the big picture. It doesn't mean that you're just going to be slavish partners, because that would make for really weak coalition governments, where you just go along to get along. I don't think that's in anybody's interest. But what I believe is necessary is for us to relook at the coalition agreements, recommit ourselves to say we have to show South Africans that we can give them something better. And we need some examples, some shining hills on the city that we can refer to and say, those are coalition governments, and the neighboring municipalities are not coalition governed, and look at the mess they're in and look at the progress the others are making. So essentially, I'm throwing down a challenge to political party leaders of all the parties that are in the opposition coalition space, is that you better start growing up, starting to learn to collaborate and cooperate with each other, or get out of the coalition. You know, if you can't get along, if you can't get along with your spouse and you have irreconcilable differences, get a divorce, get out of it and go and do your own thing. But stop trying to pee in the tent from within the tent. Do it out of the tent. And there are any number of examples in history and in history books where people have come together to work together. I mean, my favorite book on political leadership is called A Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin, about, and I mentioned it in the Business Day, Abraham Lincoln became the president of America in the most difficult time during the Civil War. And there were much more fancied contenders for that position, Bates, Seward, and Chase, and he won. And he won because there was an authenticity about him. Americans believed that his authenticity and not groomed and sort of, polished politics was what would give him the edge. And he became president. And thank God for that, because the country was tearing itself apart, and he brought it together because of his authenticity and genuine honesty and the leadership, the wisdom to have those people in his cabinet working with him, even though he went up against them, was visionary. So it's the same thing with the coalition. You go out and you contest for votes from the electorate, and you count the votes when all the dust is settled. And if you agree to go in a coalition, then you must understand that you're going into a relationship and a cooperation agreement that requires you to grow up and cooperate and collaborate together.
Yeah, and that obviously requires a strong, dynamic leader to bring all of those disparate interests together, as well as the kind of legalistic agreement that we spoke of earlier. But now, I had Bill Johnson on the show very recently, and he put forward this proposal of a broad popular front to defeat the ANC and the EFF. I didn't ask him, unfortunately, but I was wondering if that would constitute or necessarily involve some kind of pre-electoral agreement where all of the parties come together and say, this is what you're going to be voting for. I assume this is what Bill was referring to. Or do you just wait until the electoral dust has settled, see who's gotten what share of the vote, and then start negotiations from there? What would you say to this idea of a pre-electoral agreement?
A pre-electoral agreement is a very difficult thing. You know, the ANC at some stage when most of their leadership were in exile, they had a united democratic front where they got people that had the similar ideology and inclinations to work together in a sort of pre-election cooperation before liberation. But to do that during a democracy where people are contesting for ideas and votes, it's very difficult because you can have pretenders who, you know, I remember Kuster Jack, a friend of mine in Nelson Mandela Bay. He left the ANC. He was an ANC stalwart and he started a party called the Abantu Integrity Movement. And he said to me he was going to win because he had some business support and he had some urban support, suburban support, and some township support. And I remember saying to Kuster that, and he asked me to join him, and I said, no, thank you. And he said he was going to win. And I said, you'd be lucky to get 3 seats. And he only got 1 seat. And the first thing he did is he went into coalition with the ANC, which was quite curious. But if Kuster was negotiating with ActionSA on the eve of an election tonight about a pre-election pact, he would be pretending or positing that he had a lot of support, when in actual fact he didn't have support. So that's what makes those things almost impossible. So in South Africa, which is a relatively young democracy, I think political parties are still feeling their way and they want to make sure that they can actually get the votes. And anyone that is considering cooperating with other parties also want to see whether they can get the votes. Because why would you make a pre-election agreement with a political leader of a party that's not going to get any votes? Because they're going to be negotiating for positions. And as I said at the outset, our political gene pool of public representatives is very, very shallow in South Africa. And that means that people are always going to be negotiating for their own positions. And, you know, people come into politics to make money. It's very rare to have people like Mashaba, who has money and comes into politics and uses his money, his own money, to build a political party. It's very rare. What you normally see in South Africa, people come into politics to try and get access to patronage and money and build something. So I don't think it'll work. But what I did find interesting at the Biz News conference was that there were people there saying, I challenged them. I said to, you know, business people follow a particular formula for success. You've got to have succession planning. You've got to have risk aversion. You've got to have capitalization in your business, and you've got to have insurance and all those kind of things. And I asked them, how much do you invest in politics? And people look at me as if I'm mad. But politics is the one thing that can destroy a business overnight. And all the best laid plans can be destroyed by bad politics or a bad government, can be destroyed overnight. So some of the business people were saying there is, look, why don't we put some money together, build up a fund, a war chest, so to speak, and say to political parties that we believe represent our interests, you're welcome to apply to have access to this funding as long as you espouse these values. And I think that would probably be the only real way, because there's an inducement to come on board. You can get some funding to run your political affairs, but you have to sign that you will respect and espouse these values. And that would start to, corral people, those that do follow that kind of ethos, that they would be corralled into a grouping of people that could form an alternative government. Otherwise, at the moment, coalitions work like this. You go to the hustings, you compete for votes, you count the votes at the end of the day, and then you count which political parties you need as partners in order to get past the post of governance. And I think we're going to have that system for a long, long while.
I think businesses have been a bit equivocal about criticizing the ANC, even though there's so many manifest failures, because in many ways their interests are intertwined. There are ANC-aligned politicians on their boards. There are big contracts with the state. and generally a kind of a feeling of not wanting to appear unpatriotic, but actually I think they would be performing much more of a patriotic duty by standing up against some of these misgovernance problems. So how do you get business to kind of change their attitude?
Well, it's curious because business and the private sector don't work well with government and vice versa. They don't trust each other. Businesses will always go where there's a profit. So sometimes they do hold their nose while they associate themselves with some political parties, and they sort of grin and bear it. But here's something really interesting, and I read the headlines this morning with amazement. There was one headline this morning that says Pravin Gordhan is going to change the Eskom board, and the changes mooted. And I said, well, the best change would be to change Gordhan and get him as far away from Eskom as possible, because he's been there all the time while Eskom's going down the toilet. There have been 8 vacancies on that board for the last 4 years, and they've done nothing about it. The problem is not Eskom. It's the Eskom management and the cadre deployment and the ineptitude of government and the feeding at that Eskom trough by the ANC through Chancellor House and any other number of, and the Guptas, of course, cleaned the cupboard out eventually. But Chancellor House through Hitachi have been bleeding Eskom for a decade or more, solely at the interest of the ANC. So the ANC is the problem, and I believe business are starting to see that. So the only way business will turn their back on the ANC is if they believe that the ANC are going down. And I'm starting to see businesses publicly speaking about the ANC going down. Businesses, unfortunately, never found a president they don't love. But when they see that the president might be going down, then they can turn their back on the president. And that's what we're waiting for in this country. And then, ironically, isn't it amazing that Cyril Ramaphosa dubbed Zuma's 9 years as 9 wasted years while he sat next to Zuma as his deputy president? And all I've seen in the last 5 years is that 5 wasted years have gone by with Cyril Ramaphosa as the president. So there's no difference. It's exactly the same thing. So until business wakes up and realizes that the ANC is taking this country down a political cul-de-sac and a business cul-de-sac, no foreign direct investments coming into this country, and it won't as long as the electricity doesn't work and that there's no water in major cities and that the roads don't work and our ports don't work, nobody's going to invest in South Africa. So business can actually have a huge influence in changing this government, if they will, and if they can find their backbone to do that.
All right. Well, I'd now like to turn the conversation to ActionSA itself. And one of the criticisms that I've heard of the party is that its policy agenda is perhaps a little bit vague. And I think what political parties need to do is offer an alternative vision of the future. I think that's what successful political parties do. So what is Action South Africa's vision, and what are some of the core pillars of its program?
Okay, well, first of all, we're certainly not a statist organization. We believe that best governments are small governments, nimble governments that create an environment where business can flourish and you can attract investment. And that, incidentally, is the only way we're going to deal with the challenge of unemployment in this country. But some of the issues, some of the 7 core values for us are about fixing our education system, because our education system's broken. And Angie Motshekga has been the Minister of Education for more than a decade. We spend more money on education than any other developing nation in the world. We have the worst outcomes, yet she remains the Minister of Education. So that's a real problem. I've been meeting kids at TVET colleges and universities over the last 2 days. If you pass a subject at school with 30%, you're not going to get a degree or a diploma at a college, because you're just not going to be able to make muster to get those qualifications. So we believe that we need a social justice kind of legal framework where poor people are looked after and given special attention, but not made dependent like the current government. The current government has entrenched dependency to such an extent that there's a whole host of grants that people get now, and they are essentially not enough to keep anyone alive. 350 Rand a month is their latest insult to the nation. 350 Rand a month. I don't know what you're supposed to do with that when all South Africans actually want is a job. So we're saying that we need to change the government's attitude about controlling everything and all state-owned enterprises. We're strong on privatization. We're strong on private-public partnerships. We need a criminal justice system that works. We need ethical leadership, ethical, honest leadership. and we need to relook at our electoral system, the way we elect members to parliament and to councils. Proportional representation is something that's going to be with South Africa for a while because of our historical past and the fact that we have this diverse nation of haves and have-nots. But we also need to start moving like local government, where you have ward councillors elected. You need people who have constituencies that have to answer to their constituencies about what they're doing in parliament or legislatures. And at the moment, we have none of that at the top two tiers of political leadership in the country. At local government level, there is some kind of accountability. And then, where we believe we are completely different to the ANC is that Herman Mashaba is a business person. He understands that without investment in this country, we're not going to deal with poverty and unemployment. And one of the greatest challenges in the Eastern Cape, where I come from, is rural poverty. People are flocking out of the rural areas. We have a net outflow of people in a record migration of urbanization into urban centers looking for jobs that aren't there. Those people's families are dislocated. They end up living in the most terrible twilight conditions where they have no service delivery. Social services are non-existent, and their own social existence is just too terrible to imagine. So those people are actually potentially a recipe for revolution that people like Malema will utilize and promise them heaven on earth and not have any inclination on delivering on that. So we are very, very strong on turning our economy around and fixing the infrastructure and maintaining infrastructure and spending money where it will give us a return on our investment. The ANC likes to buy everything new. They just, I don't know, brand shiny new organization, really not good at maintaining infrastructure, especially unseen infrastructure like water infrastructure. And that's why we're running out of water in our cities. Sewage and water is appallingly managed under the ANC government. And those are the things that can actually really end up in, terrible health, disease outbreaks and social instability if you run out of water. So those are the things that the ANC are really poor at, and we believe we'd be much better at it. And the other interesting dynamic that we have, David, that no other political party in South Africa has at the moment, we're actually a melting pot of people from all other political parties that have had enough of whichever political party they come from. And one of the greatest strengths about that is pragmatism. Now, Mashaba is a very pragmatic politician, and I think pragmatism is the ism of politics globally now. No longer socialism, communism, liberalism, whatever. It's what is the problem? How are we going to fix it? Who's going to fix it? And if they don't fix it by that time, what are the consequences? And I like that about Mashaba. He's very business orientated, very pragmatic. And I think South Africa needs a political leader and a political party like that focuses on the nitty-gritties of getting the job done.
Yeah, look, I think my criticism of pragmatism is that often it's too much rooted in kind of bargaining and horse trading. And as Keynes once said, practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influence are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. So I think it is good to clarify what your ideological roots are, is that when you're presented with a problem or a crisis or a policy discussion, that those values inform how you actually develop those policies or your responses to particular events.
The one thing you can't do is eat ideology. And I've seen some very ideological political parties in this country that confound me on a daily basis by moving away from their ideology with such ease and just glide away from it when it suits them and glide back again. But, if I can give you an example of pragmatism and how it really can work, Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, he was a really successful prime minister who turned his country around, and from a third world country to a first world country in arguably less than 2 decades, 20 years. And his success was defined by 3 words. The first one was meritocracy, where you find the best person to do the job and the job gets done. And I know that's much easier in a sort of homogenous society or country. Our country is not homogenous, so it's very difficult. And some people might misinterpret that and say, well, if it's meritocracy, the most advantaged with the best degree is going to get the job. That's not necessarily so. I've seen in South Africa people that have astounded me that don't have all the qualifications in the world or the advantage of a comfortable upbringing being amazingly competent. So meritocracy is finding the best person or people to do the job and get the job done. pragmatism. Deng Xiaoping described it to me the best way is to say, it doesn't matter the color of the cat, black or white. If the cat catches mice, good cat. And that's what we need in South Africa. We need some mice catchers in South Africa. And then lastly is the pillar, as far as I'm concerned, to his success was honesty. And you can add integrity and any other word that is aligned to ethical leadership. And he had an incredible, he made an example of one of his deputy ministers right in his early days of his leadership. That this guy had gone overseas and didn't declare a trip with a multinational company. And when he returned, he was arrested on the tarmac of the airport. And the guy was protesting and said, I've done nothing wrong. And he said, you might not have done anything wrong, but you went overseas on an undeclared trip with a multinational company. I have to assume that you were doing something for your own interest and not in the interest of the country. As a minister, he was charged, he was prosecuted, and he went to jail. So there was a consequence to doing something corrupt or perceived to be corrupt. And we need that in South Africa so desperately, because Jacob Zuma has been staying out of court now for 20-odd years. We've had the Zondo Commission cost billions of rand, and 4 years later, and now it's just been swept under the sofa where Cyril's dollars are kept. And I have to ask, why would you sew dollars into a sofa if they were clean? Must be dirty money that's been hidden away there. And there's dirty stuff in the Zondo Commission. Why is that stuff not being laundered? Why are we not hearing about it? Cyril Ramaphosa promised so much, delivered so little. And I said, it's like the elephant giving birth to a mouse. South Africa needs the elephant to give birth to an elephant.
Right. Well, look, I mean, I think Singapore was actually quite a diverse country, still is. And that pragmatism, I think, really did get them very, very far indeed. I think this relentless pursuit of growth, competitiveness, this is the characteristics of a serious country. And I don't think South Africa, unfortunately, is a very serious country anymore. But, let's look at this issue of merit-based appointments, because BEE is one of the flagship policy agendas of the ANC government. It's also led to a lot of abuse of state institutions. Public procurement is vastly inflated in price, is abused for politically connected cronies. So would ASA be prepared to offer a non-racial alternative to the current system, beg your pardon, Action South Africa?
Absolutely. And we are totally opposed to broad-based Black economic empowerment, because it has not been anything like broad-based. It has been, it catered for a clique of people that became, obscenely wealthy and got access to all sorts of state-owned enterprise positions and positions in government. So we're totally opposed to that. We do believe that ActionSA, that we are a non-racial organization. That is the first part of our statement in our value statement, that we're non-racial. But I've gone further, and it has been a bit controversial, but I want to explain why I say that we are also a multiracial party. Because you cannot be non-racial if you don't respect and understand what multiracialism is. And with multiracialism is multilingualism, multi-ethnicity, multi-religious beliefs. And we as a country are a very, very diverse country, and you cannot even begin to claim that you are non-racial if you don't respect the fact that we look different, we speak differently, we have 11 different languages, people pray to different gods in this country, but we live under a constitution that makes provisions for all of us with a Bill of Rights. So we're a multiracial, non-racial political organization, and we will offer people, when we're in government, that the right person will get the job, not the best connected, not the person is a certain color. No, that is not a prescript to getting the job, that we will have merit-based appointments in government, taking into account, of course, the fact that there is a history in this country, and there will always be some kind of sliding scale of points in order to give equal access to people. And so I heard a politician saying the other day, treating people equally who aren't equal just continues that inequality. So you've got to try and make people equal and then treat them equally. And until they are equal, you have to have some kind of built-in sliding scale to take into account any kind of disadvantage in the past. But broad-based black economic empowerment has actually become the Achilles heel of the ANC, and that's why the lights can't be kept on, and that's why we're running out of water in most cities and provinces, and that is why our local government has collapsed. And isn't it amazing that local government is under the leadership of Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, who is now one of the candidates to become president of the country? Heaven help us, because it seems that in the ANC, to become president, you've got to excel at mediocrity to become an ANC presidential candidate. Zweli Mkhize is another one. He stole 150 million rand through digital vibes of his own health department. So these are the things that we have to overcome, and only through meritocracy and appointing people on merit. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma can never be a meritorious presidential candidate.
All right. Well, one of the metaphors that I'm quite fond of using is this idea of the wild dogs, the wild dogs being this plethora of opposition parties that could take down the ailing buffalo of the ANC. And sometimes when I read the news or scan through social media, I see the wild dogs fighting quite a lot with each other, yapping at each other's heels. Particularly speaking about the ActionSA and the DA. There seems to be quite a lot of enmity between these two parties. Is it possible to put aside some of these differences and work a bit more collaboratively with the eye on this prize of 2024?
I think very definitely there's huge potential for that. Whether the political parties, both or any others, have an appetite to put this enmity aside remains in the eating, because unfortunately there is a bit of that, and people are guarding their own territory. And also because some political parties are bleeding support or people, and people are coming to join this new political party, it raises that enmity. It makes people very defensive. And as soon as you're defensive, as I said earlier, the ears slam shut, and the mind goes off and the heart takes over, and passion then becomes the real defining issue, and people are fighting on the wrong level. But, the wild dog metaphor is a very good one, because they're probably the best hunters in Africa. They punch way above their weight division. They are very skillful if they hunt according to the plan and they don't start biting each other. But, they are very, very skillful. But I also learned in Nelson Mandela Bay that there's some political organizations and individuals that actually prefer chaos. Wild dogs cause chaos, and then they exploit the chaos. And in South Africa, I saw Nelson Mandela. We went from being the second worst run metro to the second best in 1 year. And that didn't suit the agenda of people like Andile Longisa and Bobani and various other people. So they needed to create chaos so that they could exploit the chaos. And we need to try and avert that. But to use another metaphor that I used today, because I am actually a farmer and I was in Queenstown in the farming areas, the worst thing that can happen to any family or country is, if you're a rural family, you send, one of the sons in the family out with the family flock to go and look after them in the hills as a shepherd, and expecting the young shepherd to bring the flock back home safely in the evening so that the family can have, a meal and milk and that kind of thing to sustain the family. But if the shepherd's in the hills eating the livestock when they're supposed to be looking after it, like the ANC has been doing in South Africa, then you've got to get rid of the shepherd, even though they might be your son. So we have got a shepherd that's been pulling into the livestock in a big way and coming home and blaming the jackals and all that kind of thing, when it's actually the ANC that have had this voracious appetite to steal from their own. So we need to get rid of that shepherd, and we need a new shepherd in South Africa. And we need to find the right shepherd. And, I'm talking about shepherd, and I think of David in the Bible. And David was the youngest son of a family. He wasn't even there. The father didn't even present him to be considered to be king. But he actually became the best king because he had been selected, and he was the right shepherd. Even though he was a shepherd boy, he became a shepherd boy of a nation. So I believe that there are good people out there in all the political parties. Even in the ANC, there are good leaders that want better. And if we can put our heads together and we can cooperate and collaborate and keep our heads while all about us are losing theirs, according to Rudyard Kipling, then I believe we can make this country succeed. And I'm very encouraged by this period that we're going through of trialing coalitions at a provincial and local level, because soon we are going to have a coalition at a national level. And if we haven't trialed it at a local and provincial level, we're going to make a mess of it at the very first outset. at a national level. So I'm very happy that we're going through this period of perceived enmity and fighting and jostling for positions. I think it's all auguring well for us to grow up and to start realizing that we must put the country first and start putting unemployed people and poor people in our sights in government. Otherwise, they will be swept up into some kind of revolution by people, opportunists, political opportunists like Julius Malema.
Right, Athol, one of the themes of this show is political devolution and decentralization. Why do you think that that is an important value to have in a democracy?
Well, first of all, our democracy isn't working very well because most of our political leadership structures are very titular, where you have strong leaders at the top and weak people down the political leadership chain or food chain. And then people start defining political parties as that's Mashaba's party or Zilla's party or Zuma's party or whatever, Malema's party. And that's a problem. And I think the corporate world has got this thing much better, not perfect. Some corporates don't work well at all. But the flatter you make your management or leadership structure, the better it works, because you have managers that are closer to the leadership, that are expected to take decisions, implement those decisions, and then be accountable for the decisions they've made. And I think we need that in South Africa. Our state-owned enterprises are falling apart because we don't have a flat leadership structure there. And it would be much better if there was private-public partnership or even privatization, full-on privatization and devolution in the running of those parastatals. They would work much better. So that's one thing that ActionSA is very, very strong on, is devolving power. And even at provincial level, I told you introduced me. I'm an interim chairperson of ActionSA, and we are not going to have an elective conference until after the election because we don't want to be infiltrated by people who want to destabilize us. We are building structures so that we can contest properly in an election, and this is the year of the branch. So we are starting from the bottom up and hopefully having a devolved structure of authority and leadership in this party rather than having a titular top-down kind of system. And we're doing it in practice in ActionSA, and I believe we would do the same thing in government, have a flat leadership, devolution style of authority.
Yeah, and if ActionSA is involved potentially at a provincial level in a coalition government, I think it would be important to have much more devolution of functions to the provincial level, so you can actually start turning places like Gauteng and other provinces around.
Absolutely. And, there's a big issue in the Western Cape now about devolving authority of the police to the Western Cape because the police are so notoriously bad under the national minister, and the ANC won't relinquish that. They will not devolve power. They're totally against any kind of federalism. And I believe federalism and devolution of power to where power is best applied is the way to go. And it's something that we would support very fully. And, we've got three spheres. We've got three spheres of government in our constitution, but there's actually a fourth one that slipped in, which is district municipalities. Well, we should either do away with district municipalities or do away with provincial governments, but you can't have local, district, provincial, and national. One of them will have to go because there isn't even a constitutional provision for one of them. So devolve the leadership, devolve the responsibility, and devolve the management to the lowest level possible to make things work.
Athol Trollip, I wanted to thank you very much for this conversation. I sincerely look forward to the next 18 months or so as we go ahead to the 2024 elections, and I hope that we can speak again.
David, I'm very thankful for the opportunity to talk to you. I just am very happy to be back in politics because I do love politics, and I think that politics is everything. I get very, very agitated when people say, I'm not interested in politics. And I say, that's fine. You don't have to be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. So if we all took a bigger interest in politics, we'd have better politics in South Africa.
Absolutely. Well, thanks very much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you very much, David.
If you enjoyed this conversation and you're watching on YouTube, please do give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And if you're listening on your preferred podcast platform, please do subscribe there as well and leave a review. My name is David Ansara. This is the Solutions Podcast. Until next time, take care.